We are not going to have a quorum today, apparently, but we'll make do. So, I suppose it's not on here, but let's start by welcoming Amanda. We have a new commissioner starting today. Feel free to tell us where in town you are and kind of how you came to us.
Yeah, so my name's Amanda Dewar. I live in Mendota Heights, so District H. And, you know, I was made aware of the opportunity by one of our county commissioners down there. And I'm a big parks enthusiast and trails frequent user in Dakota County, so I thought it sounded like a fun opportunity. Professionally, I'm in government affairs, so you know I do a lot of work with both local and state elected officials, so it seemed like it would be a good opportunity.
All right, glad to have you. So in terms of approval of our agenda, I will make the adjustment to that. We aren't going to be able to approve our minutes from the last couple of meetings because we once again don't have a quorum, so that will have to get kicked down. So strike those off. Are there any other changes we need to make to our agenda for the day? Okay, so you can consider that approved as slightly modified. That will bring us then to the public invitation portion of our meeting for any interested persons to address the commission on items not on the agenda. Do we have anyone registered to do that today?
We do not, Chair.
All right. So that'll bring us on to business items. These will be done, we can't actually vote on stuff without a quorum, but we can give sort of the general feel and our consensus on things, and our liaison can bring those on to the CDC to let them know what our feelings were. Although this first one we might kind of be able to do, I'll have to look at what the text was. First up would be appointment of a vice chair for the year, which I was nominating Bob Moeller. That is not what this item is. Oh, I'm getting there. I was trying to look at other things beforehand and I got my papers out of order. Okay, so this said, the chair shall name a vice chair from the commission members subject to approval by the commission, who shall act for the chairperson during temporary absence or disability. Did we have any judgment on whether that required an affirmative vote for that subject to approval part?
Is that right?
I think so.
So we'll have to actually come back to this item as well?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Let's kick this one down the road too.
So, but
Sorry. I don't think it'll be highly contentious. I haven't seen any materials.
yeah, I don't think so either. But yeah, I wasn't sure exactly what that said, so I wanted to check on that. So that's our intention, is to have Bob for this year, and then we'll come back to that later. That then will bring us on to one that we can hopefully actually do something on, which is our system-wide regional parks and trails system administrative approvals for minor long-range plan amendments. This is a change to policy that we'll be seeing. Emmett and Tracey, go ahead.
Oh. Thanks, Greg. I could have gotten up there. All righty. Well, commissioners, thank you for being here today. This one is the Regional Parks and Trail System administrative process for minor long-range plan amendments. This is the third time this topic's been brought to this commission, and it's all been information items up till today. And the idea for this is Tracey and I want to bring a formal recommendation to you to create an administrative approval process for minor amendments. So we've modeled this process off of a local planning assistance administrative approval of minor comprehensive plan amendments. And our presentation today is short. We'll take about 10 minutes, and we will be requesting your recommendation to the council. So, next slide, please. Thanks, Tracey. I could have probably done that. So our recommendation is to establish an administrative review process that would authorize the executive director, Lisa Barajas, of the Community Development Division or her designee to administratively review minor amendments for park and trail long-range plans. And this is a key point, that meet explicit administrative process criteria that's laid out in this. So it is for like super minor things that, to just put it bluntly, you've reviewed in the past that really are not material. So it's a real efficiency step forward. We will create this process through this business item first, and then we'll bring it into the policy plan update. Tony, thanks for talking to me about that when we prepped for this meeting, as a recommendation to go into the policy plan. As we've discussed, there's a bunch of benefits that we see. First off, it will save our agency partners time, their planners and planning staff, for minor requests. We also think it will save this committee review time and council staff work. And finally, our hope is that it will result in more up-to-date plans, like just better plans. So that reflect the future direction. So next slide, please. So in assembling this proposal, Tracey and I literally combed through all plan amendments over the past 5+ years. And we found that nearly 25% of all amendments would fit this minor category. They would meet the criteria included in this proposal. Additionally, we've been working on this thing we call the GIS, Geographic Information Systems Improvement Project. And that is like this meticulous review of the data layers against the long-range plans, the maps and the long-range plans. And we're finding a lot of very small errors, inconsistencies between the data and what's in the plan. And we think that this project will be able, or this proposal, this administrative approval, will enable us to fix these minor inconsistencies and errors easily, but also transparently. I'd like to now pass it to Tracey to take us into the proposal.
Thanks, Emmett. Before you is a suite of amendment tools that are both current and proposed amendment processes. The range of amendments describes an effort to match the scale of the request to a similarly scaled process while always ensuring consistency with council policies and procedures. First, let's start with the proposed administrative amendment process for certain minor amendments. These proposals would need to meet certain council-approved criteria to qualify for consideration for this process. These amendments would have an expedited administrative review by council park staff and the council's community development director or designee. I'll talk about the draft criteria in the next slide. For requests that don't meet the administrative process criteria but are still minor or focused in nature, council staff propose a minor long-range plan amendment. We've been operating with this for a while, so we propose to codify it during the Imagine 2050 process. This amendment process is proposed to have an abbreviated plan requirement process for council committee review. Next is the current full amendment process. The full amendment process is for council committee review of significant changes. It includes proposals that meet all of the plan requirements for a particular park or trail unit. And lastly, the policy plan update amendments. These amendments are system level changes that occur with a public hearing. These changes could include major boundary adjustments, trail extensions, and system additions, to name a few. We will also talk about this amendment type more as the policy plan is being updated as part of the Imagine 2050 process. So before you is the draft administrative process criteria for your and the council's consideration.
Amendment proposals would need to meet these criteria to qualify for the administrative amendment process. This criteria was developed from MPOSC, CDC, and Parks Partner meeting comments from the fall of 2023 and 2022, as well as from the last 5 years of amendments. Overall, there are 4 criteria. First, all items must be consistent with council statutes, regional system plans, and council policies, including Thrive MSP 2040. Second, all items must be minor in scope, meaning the subject of the proposal does not change the acquisition or the development concept. And third, the subject of the amendment is consistent with the following criteria for corrections, minor regional trail realignments, boundary changes, or natural area or utility council consents. Let's start with corrections. So corrections would be proposes corrections to a minor mapping or design error affecting less than 1% of the unit's total acres of the administrative boundary. Minor regional trail realignments. This would be proposes regional trail implementation realignments that alter up to 1 mile of the trail and are within 1 mile of the original alignment, but do not alter the start or end point of the trail. Boundary changes. Proposes a boundary adjustment, public-to-public land exchange, or an acquisition long-range plan amendment that changes the administrative boundary by less than 5 acres, and the land addition/removal is valued at $250,000 per acre or less. And lastly, natural area/utility council consents. Proposes land and/or easement conveyances for natural area monitoring. Conveys an easement for a natural area restoration or enhancement project that affects the administrative boundary by less than 5 acres. Underground utility that has no material long-range impacts to the park or trail and affects the administrative boundary by less than 1 acre. And lastly, the proposal will result in no impacts. The proposal does not have the potential or a cumulative or material impact to the regional park or trails, recreational opportunities, natural areas, or cultural resources. I'll end on a note that council or state funding restriction requirements will be considered, and the council reserves the right to have full council review of any proposed items. So here are some examples of possible candidates for the administrative amendment process. The first example on the left is an example of a design correction. After it was approved, a small correction of 0.09 acres or less than 1% addition to the administrative boundary was discovered. The middle example shows a possible boundary change candidate. This land exchange removed 0.3 acres of the Mississippi River Regional Trail Corridor land valued at $36,900 and added 0.3 acres of parkland valued at $33,500 within Anoka County Riverfront Regional Park. And third, natural area or utility consents. Washington County granted the Watershed District a 3.4 acre easement to protect the lake. So how will this work? Well, here are the proposed and current processes for the range of amendments that we are discussing today. Of note is the time savings of the proposed administrative process, which is estimated at 15 business days. This includes contacting the council's staff administrative process determination. The next step is working together as both council and agency staff to determine the submittal contents, which would be abbreviated and customized to the request. Then the next step would be the agency submittal, and finally, administrative review and approval. Next, the proposed minor amendment. This amendment process is similar to the proposed administrative amendment process with an abbreviated submittal that is determined jointly. This process includes a council committee review, which pushes the process to approximately 60 days. Next is the full amendment process, which could take around 60 business days and sometimes some more. And lastly is the policy plan update process. This process takes approximately 4 months. This requires a formal agency submittal, then a public hearing and a council committee review. This sums up the range of amendment processes. So how did we get here? We heard from the Council's Community Development Committee at their 2023 October meeting. The CDC spoke to a CDC annual update, regional trail implementation criteria, and political items. For the CDC annual update, consider adding an annual update for CDC on the staff reviewed administrative review items. You'll see in your business item that we have included that. Next, regional trail implementation, consider adding a trail mileage and distance to the criteria that was also included. And lastly, political items. Items that are controversial or of political interest should not be considered as part of this administrative review, and that is agreed. And next, we heard from you, MHOSC, at your October 2023 meeting. The topics discussed were on boundary changes and funding. For boundary changes, we heard that $100,000 threshold for land removal and additions is too low. Updated to more accurately reflect market rate cost of land within the metro. And consider using an average cost of 5 acres within the MUSA, approximately $1 million. For funding, boundary adjustments for lands with council or state funding restrictions that are significant should not be candidates for the administrative amendment process, and we agree. So with that in mind, the rationale for the proposed action is that the administrative process for minor long-range plan amendments is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, Chapter 5, Strategy 1, and other council policies, namely Drive 2040. So the proposed action before you is that the Metropolitan Council approve the administrative process for minor long-range plan amendments as described in attachment 1 of your report. And as Emmett mentioned, after council consideration, this policy will be integrated into the policy plan, the Parks Policy Plan area during the 2050 Imagine process. And we want to thank you. So this sums up the presentation on the administrative process for minor long-range plan amendments. Emmett and I would appreciate your support for the recommendation, and we welcome your thoughts and questions.
All right, thank you. So for Amanda's benefit, I don't know how much you've been able to go over with Emmett already, but every one of our park and trail units has a long-range plan that comes to us that shows the area of land to be acquired and a concept of how it will be developed in terms of facilities and things like that. And currently, anytime that changes, whether it's completely revamping the whole thing or adding one parcel, it comes through the exact same process to us. And we're looking at trying to modify that to cover the different levels of change. So what we need to talk about now is figuring out which things we really care about and which we're happy to let staff do. So this is a policy decision for us to decide which things actually warrant our consideration and which fundamentally don't matter enough to need the policy-making body to look at them. Comments from commissioners?
I was going to ask if what are there other examples of processes that use administrative review? I mean, is there? Because I think I feel like you know how you tracking and thinking back to all these things and going through examples of it, and there things are really minor. So I'm wondering, are there other decision making through other areas where it's something similar, like you know that this process is already being used and we're.
That's a great question. I know there's one in local planning assistance, which Tracey referenced for really minor long range or comprehensive plan amendments, that there's a process for that. You know, I'm thinking now, just stepping back, going.
We may not necessarily know what comp plans are.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Since we only work in the park comp.
We don't work.
Yeah, so comprehensive plans, every community in the metropolitan area, cities, counties, and townships have to do a comprehensive plan, land use plan. And those plans sort of guide development and growth at a very high level, and it's a very highly prescribed process that all communities go through. There are really minor changes that do happen to those that the community development director has the authority to approve if it fits a really narrow, again, slate of criteria. So that's one example. I was hoping, oh, Lisa's here. Lisa, was that good enough, or would you like to add or expand to that? Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lisa Barajas, Executive Director of the Community Development Division. In addition to comprehensive plans, we also have a similar delegated authority for the staff review of local surface water management plans, in another plan that staff in environmental services lead the review on. So these are usually pretty common, pretty typical, and aren't anything that rise to policy consistency issues.
And really, we're talking through CDC. I mean, in terms of this is that council. So when you say council committee, that's what you mean. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then lastly, the one thing is that in terms of the, there's this way where part of this is defining minor. 0.9 acres, 1 acre, 5%, only 1%. Is that? How did you come to that? Or is there a way that, why 1% in one area, 0.9 acres in one area, 5 acres in one area? And is it also relevant to the implementing agency? I think there's one of those things that, and Three Rivers has 115 miles of bike trail, and, somebody else has, who's really small?
Carver County.
Carver County, yeah, Carver County has 15 miles of bike trail, and part of it's right next to, anyway, just that kind of.
I think a certain amount of those thresholds came from just basically looking at past business items and seeing which ones we talked a bunch about and which we just said, great, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, we really did use past examples of plans, like in the examples that Tracey went through, like that big marine park reserve, the Cornelian watershed, that was just a whole lot of information for basically allowing the watershed district to put a swale in to protect the lake.
Right.
And I thought it was a really good action, but did you need to see it? I remember I talked to former council employee Tori Dupre, who's now the chair of the Cornelian Watershed District, and she's like, why did that come to you? And I'm like, well, because it involved a land record, because they had to put an easement over a land record. And that's a big deal, but it's also, it's not a big deal because it was a small.
That's a great answer. I'm based on historical things that thank you.
I was just gonna note, I had looked it over ahead of the meeting and, not having been here for previous conversations, but, on the surface, I think the criteria is reasonable in terms of, being minor and not necessarily where, it makes me think of a consent agenda on a unit of government. I don't like it doesn't necessarily take the amount of time that you need to dive deep into it, so.
And that's
I
also,
don't have an issue.
That's a point that we've talked about before as well, about whether we should have a concept of a consent agenda. And that's still a possibility that I kind of want to consider. And it might be there's the breakdown of, we're describing these as minor when there's a whole other category that we're going to call minor. So these are the extra minor. So it may be that when we get to that other middle category of what we're going to call minor amendments, maybe those would be ones that would go on a consent agenda but come before us, and full ones would come as a full business item, and these ones wouldn't come to us at all. So the question is, are we okay with that, or would we want them to come to us as possibly a consent agenda thing. That's a concept we don't currently have, but we do have the ability to make it happen. And we're starting to see if there's some places where maybe we would want to. One question I had is, you say shouldn't include things that are controversial or political in nature. How do we decide that? Is there any particular criteria or a process, or does that match up to something in like the comp plan things? Sue?
I think what my colleagues were talking about during this portion of the discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, Tracey, but I think it would relate to, say, Summit Avenue. There's going to be a change. We know that that's been a controversial trail project. The Hiawatha project. I think those are the kinds of things where we and an agency can probably anticipate which of these are going to be controversial. And so rather than try and alter the process of going through and having it okayed using the administrative, I don't know. Am I making sense there, Tracey? I mean,
Absolutely, for
Okay.
sure. Yet, anything like Summit Avenue would not be eligible for this requirement, for sure. And that's an excellent example, for sure. Anything that has public scrutiny on it, for sure. These could be termed routine or extreme, like corrections,
Yeah,
really, but very small.
Wondering with those, I think there's some like that that are very obvious where we've heard from a whole bunch of people and we know all about it. I'm wondering if there's any possibility of things where maybe staff isn't aware that it's going to be controversial until after it gets partway through the process and then it blows up, and we want to avoid that happening.
mental trail.
So I'm wondering, and I don't know whether this happens in any of the other kinds of things that they refer to for comp plans and such, would it be useful to maybe have a step of just a notification to the relevant MPOSC district member and the council member, just to say, hey, let us know if you know of anything? And
That's a
just
good idea.
maybe put that in writing. So it's not an approval, but give us a heads up if this is a problem.
And also taking a look at any previous records as it relates to that unit, have there in the past been. I mean, between council members and MPOSC members and staff, there's a fair amount of turnover, and so we aren't always gonna know the answer to that. So going forward, I think it would be good to have kind of just a file review of some sort.
And I would imagine most of that kind of history stuff, the implementing agencies will probably be the ones that know that best.
Right.
But we can at least check in with, and that's what we tell people in some of the interview stages of what does it mean to be a district representative. Part of this falls under that category of you might have the best ear to the ground of anything going on. That would be useful. There was one point that I brought up before that I'm not sure whether it's covered here or not. My preference had been to exclude anything that involved removal of a council restrictive covenant on the deed. And for Amanda, this is if land is purchased using council funds, we require something to be recorded on the land deed saying that it's used for park purposes in perpetuity. They can change that in the future, but it requires coming through the council for consent. Now, I saw you put something about funding restrictions. Is that sufficient to address that, or is that a different thing?
Chair Commissioners, it's meant to address that, and it's meant to ensure that if there is any funding restrictions, that we will review them, and I don't know, do you have any additional things to add to
Yeah,
that?
the only thing I would add is that, again, if it's not material to the, like, not a material impact. Like I was using the example when we were talking prior to this meeting of that Cleary Lake land exchange that you actually voted against. No hard feelings, but and it passed, okay? And then all of a sudden, right after we passed it, the agency, Scott County, came back to us and said, you know, we made a mistake. There was a design error and it's 0.09 acres difference. And like, I think you actually voted for the fix because all it was doing was it was fixing an error in the amount of land required, and it was, I think, 0.09 acres more. And it basically didn't have any impact on the park or trail. It was that minor. And so we were saying in that instance, that would fit a criteria. The initial one would not, of course.
Yeah.
But the second one would.
So this is something where I'd be curious what the other commissioners' thoughts are. My position was essentially that in the particular case of restrictive covenants, even if it's tiny, I wanted that to go through the next level, the so-called minor ones. The difference being, so like if you have land that has not yet been acquired by the park implementing agency, so you have a boundary drawn in and it's privately owned in holdings, and we change a boundary on that. We don't own that land, it doesn't affect anything on the deed. And then if you have land that was purchased entirely through local funds, or the county purchased it just to do their own stuff, then there's no restrictive covenant on that. It's only the ones that used council funds for, and we have, I think an elevated responsibility for the stewardship of those lands because of the history there. So I was arguing for, even if it's tiny, those particular ones I would want to bring through. I don't know whether the rest of you care or not.
That makes sense to me. Just for being good public stewards.
Okay. What do you think, Anthony?
That's fine. Is there, related to using council funds for purchasing land, and just, you made me think about it. Is there anything that we need to state relative to times where we've ever used eminent domain in properties, or I just know that has always been a very sensitive point relative to the, the council here. And so is there a need to make any statement relative to that is included in this? Or does that matter? I mean,
I could tell you that in our previous discussions about eminent domain, the conclusion there has been that eminent domain decisions are made by elected officials, and we have generally felt that that was more appropriate than us trying to guide them, because it is a sensitive topic and we are fundamentally appointed, and so we felt it made sense for that to lie entirely with the implementing agency boards. Do you have something?
Yeah, Chair Commissioners, I just wanted to point out, so the example on the left is an addition of 0.09 acres. So it was adding 0.09 acres to that council restricted covenant. The one in the middle, they removed 0.33 acres from a covenant and then added 0.33 acres to a covenant. And then on the right, we have a lot of council consents, which are just easements over restricted covenants.
So I would think the middle one I would want to exclude, but the other two would be fine for me. It's just the actual removal that I want to see.
Chair, can I make one?
Just want to go back to the criteria.
So one thing I was thinking about is the GIS improvement project. And so that's this.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how that affects this.
Yeah, and this is what worries me about it, because there are literally just mistakes out there that, like, the way a park or a trail was mapped originally was like there was a small error, and so that there is a difference between what is in the data and what is in the long-range plan. And I'll give an example of Blakely Bluffs in Scott County. They purchased, you know, a parcel of land, and they didn't, the land surveyor didn't get out to the land because it was winter and there's a railroad track and the Minnesota River going by. So they created a boundary that ultimately they made a small mistake. It was a couple acres. And when they went through the maps and the GIS information, they discovered that they made that error. And the question is, do we need to bring that level of an error through this commission and council? And you know, our proposal would be to not just if it was a mistake, just to correct it. The scale of the mistake really matters, and so large errors I think we would bring here, but minor ones that meet the criteria laid out here would qualify for administrative approval.
What I'm trying to see in that case is what would be the kind of situation where a GIS correction would involve removing a covenant from a deed. Because, you know, if you see we purchased this land and our GIS only covers part of it, which I think is what happened in that case, you just redraw the GIS line to include what you actually bought. Would there be something where you'd actually need to say, oh, what we bought wasn't what we intended to buy, and now we need to split up what we bought?
Let me try to be clear about this. So what happened in that instance was that the land record was described incorrectly, that the surveyor made a mistake, and that it was the GIS data that actually called out the mistake of the original survey. And so when they found that out, they needed to correct the ARC and restricted covenant so that it expanded it to the area that should have been included when it was originally brought into the system. Did that make sense?
Well, so the actual purchase agreement was wrong, and therefore the recorded deed, if it had even gotten to that part, would have been wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was years after that they discovered it.
But that was expanding and adding restricted covenant to more.
Yeah.
In that case.
In that case, yes. Because they missed a few acres.
So for that one, I'd still be fine with it.
Being
It
administrative.
would only be in the other direction,
Losing it.
yeah. Which I suppose could happen in a similar way, but probably not super often.
I don't think this happens very often in either direction. That's what I think.
I mean, I think I'd be inclined to say, you know, include the language that ones with removal of restrictive covenant can't go through this way. And if you, in the process of that GIS project, find that you have 50 of them, come back and let us know and we'll see if we can tweak it.
This is my worry, Chair, is that we have 50 of them because we are going through it right now, and there are so many like little small errors that were made, and it's just because the scale of that GIS is so much more precise than the original mapping in these long-range plans. Because as you know, you're looking at your long-range plan and you're looking at an 8.5 by 11 map and going, oh, there's the park. And it's not, like the detail is not great. And so.
And I'm sure you have,
But then I know there's land records to back that up.
I'm sure you have that many of these, you know, GIS corrections. The question is how many of them would involve having to remove a restrictive covenant?
I will just go with a lot of them because they were all, I mean, not all, a lot of them were acquired with council and state and council funds, you know, and all of those have restrictive covenants.
I think, well, it's my kind of high-level review of the GIS concerns, that these are old, really long time ago situations that may already have approvals with them, but we can't find the approvals. And they're not reflected in the plan, and they're coming up through the GIS project because of the scale of the GIS. We haven't ran into a restrictive covenant adjustment need yet, let's just say. So, yeah, I'm not fully, a lot of these are trail implementation where they have approval for the alignment, but they're buying the whole parcel and they're putting the trail in a different place than the plan. That's the vast majority of it. Some of them are minor corrections from really old plans. Other ones are total mapping errors, like Emmett was saying. And so either the land description is wrong or the land description is totally right, but it's not reflected in the plan correctly. So the GIS is showing it correctly, but the plan's not correct.
Yes, Amanda?
Oh, I was just I'm just throwing this out there, as perhaps a way to structure it, not change any of the work that you all do. I assume you would have, documentation of all the decision-making steps, anyways, but it would change the approval timeline a little bit, is kind of set up the consent agenda process. You link to all the work, and the onus is then on us to go through them, and if there's any that we have concerns and we want to talk about, then like at a city council meeting, you pull them out and then you ask for staff to walk through them. So then that just puts it like, we have all the information about the ones that you're proposing to do administrative approval, and probably 99% of them we wouldn't have anything to say about, but in the event we did, we could remove them and have a discussion.
Yeah, possibility. Sue?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to suggest that perhaps it would be a good idea to try this for a year, 2 years, whatever an appropriate timeline would be, and then to come back and assess it and see if it should be tweaked some more, and if there should be some more structure put to it. I think giving it a try is a good idea. Anything that creates a more efficient process and takes out unnecessary work for staff, and both here and within the agencies. So that would be my recommendation.
Sure. And I'm not sure exactly how you work with professional staff, but you could possibly get a little more information about how likely this is to even be an issue between now and when it comes to CDC.
Okay.
Yes, Anthony?
Yeah, and actually I really appreciate what you said, Susan, and partially because, Emmett, I realized that this is you exercising some foresight, right? Like I don't know if anybody else received it that way. But
You're giving them way too much credit.
well,
I'm kidding.
I mean, it really is, we have more technology, right? We have a more accurate description of absolutely everything we do.
Yep.
And so we're creating this potential future challenge, right, on every document that comes down the line because of this. So I really think about it, and that just feels like exactly, you have exercising some foresight in terms of what will be coming to us because there's a tremendous amount of reviews coming up, right? I mean, and so, yeah, we definitely need to move ahead with this, accept your professional, recommendation and then all the experience that you bring to this, and think about how we can be more efficient, right? I mean, so, I don't know, I just feel like, is it 2 years or
Yeah.
Whatever that is, that we move forward and.
Well, and within that timeline, I think it would be, excuse me, I didn't ask for
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Within that timeline, if there could be some updates from time to time, we did it, we had an administrative one, this is how it worked really well,
Well, that was my next question for you, since you're on CDC and the comp plan updates fall under that as well. Do you get a notification for those of any sort, or you find out somehow that there's been some of those that happened?
Oh, yeah.
In what form does that come?
Oh, I'm gonna let Lisa answer this because she's
Should've
smarter,
stayed.
way smarter than I am.
Thank you, Councilmember, Mr. Chair. I know our council members get their inboxes inundated with correspondence from us, so they get a lot of information. We do both correspondence with council members around amendments within their districts. When we have reviewed them administratively, they're copied on all of that correspondence. And then we also do annual updates to our Community Development Committee on the number of amendments that we reviewed that year, how many went through the committee, how many were done administratively, and then overall trends on what we're seeing in those amendments as well. Comprehensive plan amendments are typically in the 150 to 250 amendment range, so it's a lot of data that we're bringing and can be hard to keep track of when you're only looking at one or two at a time. So we do those at bring a larger report on those. I would imagine that the amendments report here to this group around long-range plans would actually be a lot more manageable as far as assessing what we saw and what passed through, but it's something that we would model similarly, that sort of annual update process. So not only that you're seeing that what we're what staff are seeing in that and getting that in whole in a package, but that you're also have the opportunity, or staff have the opportunity to say, this is what else we're seeing, or there's opportunities for refining the process or considering other types of amendments or changes to the existing ones that are authorized for types of eligible uses. For comp plan amendments, we periodically suggest, as staff suggest, revisions to the eligible types of amendments that are delegated to staff, or adjust thresholds, similarly as Tracey was saying, based on historical information, what we're seeing and trends that we're seeing, but also how we're seeing council members act on amendments and whether they go on consent or not. And also just what we're seeing broadly in development trends. What's becoming more common, we said, for example, very low thresholds for the size of development that staff could review, 100 units, and now we have so many apartment buildings that go in. We're like, yeah, this is an apartment building. Do you want to see that one too? And they're a lot larger. So those are the types of conversations that that staff would continue to bring as we're bringing those updates and seeing changes and trends over time too.
Okay, so it's notification at the time that it happens and a summary report annually as an information item, but it's not a consent agenda item.
No,
that's correct.
Okay. And I suppose if we were doing something of already notifying to check whether anything was controversial, that would cover it in much the same way. That would make sense to me.
Yep.
Okay. I think that pretty well covers my bits. Anything else? Okay. Does that give you the feedback you needed?
Yeah, that was very helpful. There's still a strong interest in understanding what's the nature of these, but
Yeah.
support for it to move forward.
And some of it will also depend on seeing as you bring the next minor level through. We might go, oh wait, we should have covered something on the other one, and we may tweak it then too. Yeah, in terms of the thresholds for acreage and dollar amounts and things like that, I think we'll have to see a few more to decide on those, but on the surface they seem reasonable, and that's pretty much what we said. I don't know what previous meeting it was that we looked at this last year. It was like,
October.
yeah, it seemed okay for everyone there too.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So, yeah, if we had a quorum, we would have voted on that, but since we don't, we're just letting Sue know what we think, and you feel like you have what you need to bring on.
And Emmett always makes sure I know what I'm supposed to be talking about.
Excellent.
It's
Okay.
a challenge. If you thought his job was stressful before.
Hard.
All right, that'll bring us on to information items. We'll start with preliminary local forecast to 2050. We have a new person to talk to us. Introduce yourself.
Presentation's up, okay.
Go ahead.
That's situated. Take your time. Mr. Chairman, members, I'm Todd Graham. I am a principal forecaster with Met Council Research. And thank you for the invitation to be here. So, My main project for years has been renovating our forecast practice, implementing new techniques and methods with a goal of better forecasts. Emmett, Mullin asked that I come and show what we have and what we released last week. Okay, so I'll start this presentation. Here's an agenda with why and how we forecast in the Twin Cities. The middle part of this is highlights from the Metro total forecast and the local forecasts, which are new. And I do have to disclaim this is a work in progress. Analyzing and modeling the future is contingent on a lot of assumptions of how we will steer toward a better future. So any new policies that Met Council has are not yet vested and entered into the model that we use. We wait for our council members to tell us what the new policies are. Then we'll go back to the drawing board and back to the model and work on it some more. So, a work in progress. So jumping in, why we forecast. Met Council is a planning agency, and regional planning is a forward-looking enterprise, and any good plan is going to include expectations about the future, about conditions related to our planning. So with forecasts, we're called on to answer where and when and how much growth are expected the next 3 decades. And this work matters because in the Twin Cities, both Met Council and the cities are involved in systems and infrastructure planning and service delivery. And regional and local planners are planning for the same future. The local context mirrors the regional context. We have forecasts in part to facilitate everyone being on the same page. Okay. So the forecasting challenge is how do we know about the future? Because we do not have a crystal ball. Sorry to tell you that. I know you thought we did. We are providing answers about the future through forecast models, and real-world systems are being reduced in model space to just key components, and we represent it in systems of equations and accounting tables, and we do some statistical estimation of how things work, how regional development works over a period of decades, and fit that all together into mathematical equations and a model. This slide is just a list of 3 models that we have in-house, and it's not the only models we have, but I'll just keep it simple. We have a regional economic model that we use for region-level economic activity and migration flows and population. The results of that modeling were presented to Met Council in April, 9 months ago. We have a land use model for allocating the future amounts from the region level down to the local level. So top box, we're coming up with regional totals, and the middle box, we're assigning, if we're gaining 300,000 households, where exactly are those going to be? And finally, our travel demand model interacts with the land model. It receives the geographic distribution of where will jobs and households be, and predicts resulting network conditions, which is important to doing our transportation planning, assessing, okay, where do we need more capacity, where is there going to be congestion? So our region level, macro level model is called REMI, which is Regional Economic Models Incorporated. And it includes a demographic model for tracking population progression over time. And by demographic model, I just mean, again, a lot of accounting, kids being born, people aging, people dying, people moving to and from Minnesota. That's the demography in a nutshell. So on screen is the region level totals that we presented to Met Council back in April. We expect to gain 660,000 population and to gain 320,000 households and a lot of employment too. Importantly, these are regional totals. And the logic here, if you think about the previous slide I showed, the logic is that businesses and households are making a succession of choices. They're first deciding, what region or state to live in. That's their first choice. And then we will have a second model, I'll get into that, about where specifically in the region to live. Here's a population progression. And this slide is the green line is our new forecast. It is a little bit different, a little bit clawed back from previous forecasts. We do expect slightly less growth than we were talking about a few years ago. The reasons, I'm going to keep it really brief. Birth rates have slowed. They're at record low levels. Migration to the region has slowed, and that both has international and domestic components. You're probably familiar with those issues. The model has a lot of demographic details into it. Just very quickly, this is the racial makeup of the future population. We have a very fast-growing Black, Indigenous population of color. And other demographics that are in the model. The aging of the population. We have we actually have age groups in tremendous detail, but I've just put 2 age groups on here: the over and under age 65. And you'll notice that that one age group is growing more than the other. I think working, people you'd call working age, we're gaining about 250,000 over the course of 30 years. But at the same time, we're gaining 400,000 seniors. And I explained to our council, because they asked this question, are seniors moving here from elsewhere? I am paraphrasing. But no, this is the dynamic of aging. We're already here. And people are aging in this region. Largely, this is the effect of the baby boom generation being the largest generation up to that point in history, and the first generation to really enjoy longer life expectancies and living into their 80s or maybe 90s. So, yeah, the aging of the population is going to be a big deal. It will have implications for transportation, the housing market, workforce trends, activity patterns. And when I say activity patterns, that possibly includes park usage. Okay, bringing it all together, 2050 will look very different from 2010, and growth is slowing. It is slower than we previously forecasted. I think the committee has these slides. In the interest of time, keep moving. Thanks. So now for a little transition. The region level trends forecasts are where we started, and but it's not the big puzzle. The big puzzle is how to distribute region total forecasts to specific places. If our region is gaining 320,000 households, hundreds of thousands of jobs, where will those be situated? So to answer that, switch back to how we forecast. The last couple of years, we've licensed and implemented what's called the Urban Sim Blocks model, and we use this to handle puzzle solving. It's projections of, number one, location choice behavior, how households will choose where to live, and second, real estate supply. That is, where will new housing show up, where will new business sites show up? So for our team, those are the questions. We're using data that we have historically about how the real estate market works. We're coming up with some statistical analysis of how, in the past, people have chosen where to live and where to build. And the steps that we advance through include, first of all, a lot of data assembly and cleaning, then identifying and estimating the relationships that matter, coming up with the formulas that I mentioned before. And once we have those formulas estimated such that they can explain behaviors and trends and patterns, it's only then that we turn to extending all of this into the future and building a future time series. Okay, that was a mouthful. It gets worse. Our regional forecast has socioeconomic details. Different market segments have different behaviors and outcomes. So we are considering each group, we are considering a number of different groups separately to allow us to model and predict who goes where. And it especially matters when the demographic changes are lopsided, which I mentioned in the previous section. Certain demographics are growing very fast, namely the massive aging of the population. Okay, since thousands of specific locations would be way too much to deal with, I will say that instead we represent each location as a set of characteristics, neighborhood characteristics. And we are moneyballing it is what we're doing. We're predicting the probabilities of households of specific types potentially matching with specific locations. And then we are probabilistically assigning those giant numbers, spreading it out across the region. Boy, I've really generalized and glossed it over, but that's it in a nutshell. I'm gonna pass on that one. Okay, so that in a few slides is the location choice system that our model tries to reduce into equations. What to say on this slide, the thing to say is that the model does take account of plans and policies and limitations. Limitations like environmental limits, what areas are environmentally sensitive, really shouldn't be developed, and policies. Policies establish an envelope of what's possible. So from local governments, we have allowed land uses and allowed densities. Those are in the comprehensive plans that were discussed earlier in this meeting. And from Met Council, we have the definition of our wastewater service area. We have our 2050 high-frequency transit system. We have the network of future highways, which isn't going to look that different from the current highways. It's the same system. And the projected accessibility between all points in the region. What places, this is, when I say the accessibility picture, I'm talking about what places are really close to things and what places are really remote. That has a lot of influence on what places will develop. What else to say here? A discussion that we have with planners, local planners, is that this envelope of what's possible is not the same as a forecast. In many places, the forecast results could be less. They could be inside the envelope of what's possible. Which is to say, not every city is going to develop every piece of land that they have color-coded on their maps. Two of my colleagues had, in our community development division, had done an all-cities review of all the land uses in the region. They presented this to the council, I think 2 years ago. And what they found is there's enough residential land already guided to last us well beyond 2050. I'm not going to put an end year to it, but I'll say it's surely beyond my lifetime that we were not going to run out of land. So, I've briefly tried to cover our forecast process is distributing these regional totals using this local model, considering the land supply, the land demand. Yep, that's it. So now you want to see some results, right?
Yeah.
I do need to disclaim these are These are preliminary. We will discuss with local governments and partners, and some will provide us new data that we're requesting. So the version 2 will differ from version 1, and yeah, this slide, this is households in year 2020. This isn't a forecast. This is where households were 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And then this next slide is 2050. And if we flip back and forth, you'll see what's happening here is the gain of 320,000 households is really quite distributed. There will be growth in all parts of the region. There is infill and intensification in the center, but there's also an outward push, an outward expansion to the second and third ring suburbs, what our planners call the suburban edge. And next slide, here's the net difference between 2020 and 2050, where we are adding the 320,000 households. Very briefly, about 31% of the growth is expected in the center. There's about 43% of the growth going to the second ring suburbs, 19% of the growth going to the developing edge, and that's really only the smallest share. What's left that goes to townships that are deliberately remaining rural, and to outlying rural centers. What I mean by rural centers is places on the western end of this map, Cologne, Minnesota, Norwood, Young America, New Germany, rural centers. Oh, I forgot this was in here. We will have some demographic details. We have not, at the end of this process, the very end, this isn't something that we've put on our website. At the very end, we will have also some demographic details, but we're not ready to call any of that really ready to look at. I said earlier, the senior population is the fastest growing, and most of the, well, I was going to say most of the households growth, but that is again because they were younger households in the future. I will be 80 years old, yeah, sure, God willing. And yeah, all parts of the region are going to be seeing this gain in senior households. Youth population, a lot less growth in youth population. I don't think you should read too much into it, but let me go back, where all parts of the region we're seeing growth in senior population. The very light colored areas, the lightest yellow are areas that have no growth. What I'd say about this map is, well, the bullets that are on here, there will be more youth growth in areas with populations of color. There will be more youth growth in areas that are wholly new green fields and new subdivisions, neighborhoods that are attracting young families. There really will not be youth growth in what you'd call mature suburbs, places that already have fully developed and do have these older populations. Moving toward a wrap up. How are we doing on time? Okay.
Good.
Thumbs up. Oh, it's frozen. Here we go. We did release last week the preliminary version 1 set of forecasts. They're on our website at metrocouncil.org/forecasts. The very limited thing that we've released is there's a page that presents a searchable map. You can look up the preliminary forecasts for any city or township. We're just providing at this point city and town totals. There's an Excel workbook that can be downloaded. And that's what we're asking the cities to look at. We have not yet provided them sub-city numbers. That comes much later. Our timeline, what we have on screen, this is the timeline for this refresh of the local forecasts, and we are now at the green dot where we've released this preliminary set of forecasts. And that's really not the end, it's, see on the arrow, it's toward the beginning, because we will be receiving comments from cities, hopefully constructive and providing us with data. That will allow us to go back to the drawing board, incorporate what we missed into our model, also incorporate into the model a new refreshed travel demand modeling that will be worked on over the next couple months, and also introducing into the model some mathematical representation of what policies our council comes up with. We're waiting to hear about that. So by summer, and let's say, if you want a date certain, let's say August, we should have a version 2 of forecasts that's released. There will be a public hearing period. This coincides with, it's the same public hearing timeline as the regional plan, the Imagine 2050 plan. And then a year from now, hopefully council approval. That would be approval of either a version 2 or version 3 forecast. And then we get to the end of the timeline. I've been getting this question a lot, why are there so many versions? And there are so many versions, again, because what we released last week does not yet have any new policies in it. It doesn't yet reflect water supply analysis that we expect to happen. It doesn't yet reflect the new and refreshed travel demand modeling. But we will have all of that in the proposed local forecast version 2. That'll be the really hot ticket set of forecasts. Okay, and that's the set of forecasts that will be called either the proposed or public hearing local forecasts proposed for inclusion in the Imagine 2050 regional plan. Let me just say, move toward the last slide here. These are some of the, as our city officials are looking at this, and we did distribute this to city planners and also city managers. We thought maybe they could use a suggestion of what it is we're trying to have them answer. And so these are the things that we're most interested in. We've asked them, can you comment on the reasonableness of these forecasts, both metro-wide if you like, also for your specific piece of the metro, your city, and then also we're asking if they would be willing to share with us data that we may not have. We think we have a pretty good handle on what's going on with development the past 10 years, but it gets a little bit muddier, grayer, with what's going on the next couple of years. We're generally aware of big development projects when a plan amendment comes in, but there's also, there's probably most of the development in the region doesn't require a plan amendment. Most of it is just happening. City halls often know where those projects are. So those are the sorts of things that we are asking of cities. I'll wrap up by saying, what's important to us is that the Met Council and the local planners are ultimately working from the same set of numbers. And we're flexible about revising and revisiting these questions of forecasts. Because when the cities get into the next planning cycle, working on their plans over the next 5 years, and hopefully being done in 5 years, some of the cities may really change their city plans, which would change the envelope of possibilities I talked about. And at that point, if those land plans are being radically overhauled, then we revisit what they expect for growth. Well, that's my presentation. Chair Russo and Emmett committee members, I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions from commissioners? I may have a couple if you don't. Anthony, go ahead.
Probably a lot of questions. One of the, is there, within this bill, how, and I think you said something to the effect that regional context is connected to local, I don't remember exactly, but something basically micro to macro kind of thing, the context, the regional context then somehow reflects local context.
Mhm.
And how local is local when you are talking about that? Are you mean just city context, for example, Minneapolis, or are you able to look more closely, so either by census tract or
Yes, I get what you're saying. Okay, yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of that comparative context?
Sorry for scrolling through all of this.
That's-
So the model that we developed does consider at a very small level of geography. This map that's on screen is transportation analysis zones. There are 3,000 zones that we've defined in the Twin Cities.
Okay. So it really-
Ultimately, that's the bottom line unit of analysis. A city like Minneapolis has hundreds of transportation zones in it.
Are you, so and then on the job creation side of things, for example, I know there's a HUD measurement they use around job proximity related to community. And so is that something that you all look at as well? And I just, it's interesting from a development standpoint, and one of our challenges regionally is equity. We are able to do our predictions of where Black people live, poor people live, and as much as that's created, now we're doing predictive work on it.
Mhm.
And so how is that, I don't know, how is that taken into account? Because I
Yes.
do think it's really interesting that.
Yeah, Mr. Taylor
That's for.
and Mr. Chairman, we do take into account the accessibility terrain of the region, what things are clear, are near, and what things are far. And we are coming up with measurements of, for any given point in the region, how many jobs are nearby, how many other households are nearby. This is the one slide I glossed over and didn't really present.
Yeah, and you went quickly, but I thought this was really the idea of urban location, employment in neighborhood.
Yes.
And it seems like job proximity relative to low-income communities is increasing.
Yes, and does matter. The point of this slide is describing what matters to people. Statistically, if we were to predict where people, what places people value and where they're likely to end up living, the things that mattered are the things that are listed in the bullets here. We did find there was a difference between all of these market segments. Slightly different priorities. Some of them are make you go, huh, that's interesting. The thing that makes me go, huh, is that high-income households want to be near where they work, but they don't want to be near other people.
Well, and where they work is becoming more proximal to
Yes.
them. Like we're making that response. I'm just, I want to make a separate appointment and come talk more. I don't want to take everybody's time out because I'm very, there's, in reading this, and I just say this as kind of in passing, but low-income communities, they themselves represent communities of less choice.
Yes.
That's, which is really weird, that they literally represent communities of least choice. And the way that this, and actually one of the things you said that I think is absolutely, the idea of households of specific types choose certain characteristics. Like it's really interesting, and I don't, I don't know if what we see is reflecting those choices in development strategies and what we do as much as they also predict least choice, or there's something there. So I think it's really compelling, and I really love this, and I would we wanna come and spend 2 hours with you.
It's like,
It's always,
some of these categories are what they're choosing, and some of these categories of they didn't get a choice. Like, I'm kind of getting at.
yeah,
Mr. Chairman, that is what I was gonna say in my response, is that one of the things I glossed over, I didn't really mention, is that one of the factors being considered is what people can afford. And yes, low-income households in that regard have the least choice. That is the market segment that is, has a lot of constraints. They are the market segment consuming and using the housing that is left over after everyone else has purchased what they can afford.
I have not heard very many policy leaders talk about it that directly though, and your data shows that. The other thing about it is that there is policy that also dictates that. So the highest concentration of Section 8 homes, right, is that's a policy decision that actually is driving home purchasing, because the lowest property values where absentee landlord work can happen are gonna be in the communities of least choice. You're not gonna rent property in Minnetonka, you know what I mean? There's no one's using a Section 8 voucher there, but where you can buy properties for under $300,000. You can do mortgage, you can finance, you can, and Section 8 vouchers serve those communities, and that's Phillips, near North Side. It's feels very predictive. So I just, I really, it's great numbers, and I think there's something we can dig into and use it to do more work related to equity than we are. This is phenomenal.
I noticed that there's some things in here that are sort of a chicken and egg situation. For instance, your growth estimates are constrained, when you talk about the envelope, you're constrained by the extent of the MUSA, but your growth estimates also drive policy decisions about whether to expand the MUSA.
Yes.
And similarly, it's people want to be located by parks, and we locate parks near people. How do you kind of pick which one comes first, and how that goes back and forth in figuring out an estimate?
Mr. Chairman, it turns out that development moves slowly in this region, so we have that advantage. Internally, we have shared earlier in this planning cycle what we were calling a scenarios exploration, a range of possible futures. We shared that with all of the system planners and all of the divisions of Met Council. And the response from our wastewater planners, and I'm going to paraphrase, is, okay, this is showing us that we really already have a large enough wastewater service area. It doesn't really need to be expanded. The MUSA, the wastewater service area, was, I would say it was really supersized back in the 1980s, 90s, and turn of the century, and we have still not fully absorbed all of that urbanized or urban potential land supply. So I think the decision is already being made by our wastewater system planners, who are recommending no major expansions of MUSA. It's a big enough MUSA right now to serve the 2050 expected population. A second thing that I'll say is, you saw on the slide about the population trend. We did claw back or reduce the trend line. At a certain point in history, when I first started working at Met Council, we were expecting there would be 1.5 million households by 2030. In the regional plan that followed the Great Recession and housing collapse, we moved that milestone back to 2040. And now we're moving it back again. We expect 1.5 million households in 2045. So yeah, the MUSA is large enough. Finally, the most complicated question you asked is, what about park planning? I would leave that up to our park implementing agencies and this body. I do think we've got a data resource that helps answer the questions about where future population is going to be, and that can be leveraged in making your park capital or land acquisition decisions.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm always intrigued by MUSA stuff because I'm literally the last house served by sewer. I have municipal sewer and across the street has a private septic system.
Good work.
I don't feel like I'm that far out, but apparently I am. And that second part also gets to something I wanted to raise, and I don't expect an answer for this, but the question in my head is, do we have any sort of sense of what is enough in terms of parks and trails? Like, is there some measure of acres of park per capita or miles of trail per capita, or what distance from home to those amenities people are happy with versus ones where they feel like there's not enough? Like if you were just to go poll all the different communities around the country and see which ones do people say their park systems are great and which ones are like, well, no, it's kind of eh. And can we measure that at all? And how does ours compare? Like, I think most people think ours is pretty good, but then the question is, even if it's good today, are we keeping up with the forecasted growth, or are there areas where we're falling short, or maybe we're okay for the overall region, but can we have some sort of data that shows which subsets of the region are underserved in that respect? We've talked about underserved populations in terms of demographics, but we don't, I think, have a great way of saying underserved like places. We've done some stuff with the just a strict radius around
Proximity.
stuff, but that doesn't necessarily take into account the difference between, well, this radius covers 1 million people and this radius covers 40,000 people, and those are potentially different things. If it's like, I want to go to a park and have a natural experience, if you go and you're shoulder to shoulder with people, that's not the same. And do we have any way of establishing measurements of that? I'm sure the answer today is no. So I'm just going to put that in your mind to think about.
Yes. I'm just kidding. Yes, I'll put it in my mind to think about. I think it's a great question. I've seen Trust for Public Land come up with different metrics for how much is enough. And those are great questions with parks, so I am not answering your question, but I just love to talk. The thing I am thinking about is how I feel like our region was far behind on trail development, and there were a lot of areas that really weren't served by trails, and our regional trail system is growing to be like almost an arterial system for the local trail system. And so I feel like lately there's been a real demand for that. And how much is enough, I will get back to you. But I do think it's interesting to look at population centers and proximity. And I don't know the answer. So I will just stop talking and say, we'll think about that. And that's a good question.
I know my city periodically does a community survey to figure out kind of resident feelings and priorities. And some of the questions in there are, how do you feel about our park system? And I'm wondering if any of that happens at the county level or the regional level. I don't think I'm aware of anything quite like that. Might be interesting. Yes, Anthony?
I think, especially with the difference in kind of, this also reflects that, because I think, Tony, one of the things that happens is that the communities, more centrally located communities, that are particularly urban centers where the regional park system has a different kind of relationship to where people live, the demand is different. Yeah. I think that's one of the things that we see that is a difference, is that the communities themselves are making demands on where they want to, what are the characteristics of the places they want to live, right? And what's happening in the core, inside of kind of Minneapolis, St. Paul, we'll say, or near first ring suburb, is there's a different requirement or a different ability to say what their expectation is of how close a park is and what happens in that park,
It's true.
right?
Like where I live, I expect that I'm gonna have to drive.
Absolutely.
Whereas in Minneapolis, you might expect that you can walk.
Right.
And that's
And-
perfectly reasonable.
You're gonna expect that there are multi-sport fields in that park versus, right, and even we're fighting, you know, for us, since like we're fighting Minneapolis, I hope anybody from Minneapolis, that a pickleball court belongs in a regional park.
Yeah.
Like this, like, you know what I mean, so that is a very specific, I know for sure the Rivers Park District is not fighting for pickleball parks at Highland. Right? I mean, you know, it's just like it's just really interesting how those,
Better
so,
take a look at that senior population growth.
yeah, yeah, I mean, it's really very interesting. And pickleball, and I'm just gonna laugh, were you here the first time they brought pickleball to, you remember that first plan from City of Minneapolis Regional Parks related to
Yeah.
pickleball? I
Shingle.
know everybody thought this was a joke. Like, I'm just telling, you know, like for real, bike trail, pickleball, like that's a real, you know, it was near North Mississippi Regional Park, and there was that. So all I'm saying is, I think, Tony, what happens is that it's interesting from a development perspective that the characteristics most valued by those communities living near those is dictating how we develop regional parks too. You know, and what a regional park is. And so,
Different interests, different generations.
yeah, it's really, I mean, it's, you know, it's anyway, it's just a, jump right in. No, I think that's one of the things that is really interesting as we kind of think about the system and what it reflects and how it's developing. And even on the outskirts, what we see, new development in Chaska requires a certain allotment of land for green space. You know, a housing development in Minneapolis does not have the ability to do that. Right, we're fighting over 2040 versus 2030, right? I mean, there's so much crazy, you know what I mean, in the city, inside of the constraints of the, you know, our beltway, whatever we'll call it, 490-40, you know, it's a different sensibility and a different capacity to make demands and constraints on development, and I think that's being reflected in the way that the city is developing. And so so do we lean into that and then, you know, kind of push on that so there's something, you know?
Yeah, there's a lot of like qualitative sense of the state of things that the implementing agencies are gonna know. I'm wondering, is there any way to condense that down to data and communications that we can look at a regional scale and wrap our head around all those different differences and how our planning relates to that? Like particularly when we do the system plan amendments and we say, oh, we're gonna add a search area for something here. What are we basing that on? We've done a lot of it, you know, some of those were just, hey, we happen to know that there's a big parcel of land that may come up for sale. But if we were trying to do something beyond that and just pick out, hey, this is the spot, like, this is far beyond our time, but North Mississippi was one of those where someone said, hey, this part of town is underserved. And that was a, you know, political decision driven by the legislature in some ways, actually. But do we have similar kind of data to show where are those spots today that need more attention? I'm not sure. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.
That'll bring us on to our next information item, which is the 2050 Regional Development Guide and Regional Parks Policy Plan update. Go ahead, all of you.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I'm just looking at the time, it's 25 to 6. I'm thinking we want to have more commissioners involved in these conversations. And I'm wondering if we can just take like 20 minutes and go through our slides. And what we're going to try to do is give you a sense of where we see the plan going, because we're really starting to get a sense of where we think at least it needs to go. If you have any comments or suggestions, it'd be good to hear them. but then I could promise to bring it back, a similar presentation next month, but with the idea that it will be evolved a little bit further, because we are working really closely with our park agency partners on a number of topics. I was cracking up, Janessa, we were talking about recreation activities and facilities and how that is evolving. Like it's really actively evolving, and there's an expectation that it will. So, and we want our plan to keep up with that. So what I'm saying is it okay if we just kind of go through these slides, get some quick insights, we'll call it a day, and then we'll come back with something very similar next month, but with the idea that it's sharing the evolution of where we are with the plan that is emerging.
Sure, we can do that. You might also consider breaking out some of the background explanation where we've been already stuff separately, and maybe send that to Amanda and Chris.
Sure.
And they can kind of see that part and then spend the meeting time more on the where we're going.
The substance of where we're headed. Okay, that sounds good. Well, I will just dive in to keep things moving, but today Tracey, Colin, and I are going to just share our progress and where we see the regional parks policy going. So this is about a 20-minute presentation, and there are opportunities to provide input as we go. So could you go to the next slide, thanks. Here's, we are actually picking up from our last meeting where we were discussing the draft regional parks and trails objectives.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Emmett, what's that white stuff on the ground?
Oh,
I have no idea. No, that is aspirational, but that
Really
is.
aspirational. All right.
If you weren't at the last meeting, we will give you a little orientation to where we're headed, but we'll catch you all up. We are really capturing your insights and advice, and we're working them into the plan. We want to play it back to you, though, to make sure you think that we're on the right path. The orientation to the existing parks policy plan, we're going to go into a little bit more detail into Chapter 3, which is the system plan, what exists today, and then Chapter 4, siting and acquisition, or locating parks and trails. I'd like to now pass it to Tracey to talk a little bit about the plan structure and high-level goals.
Thanks, Emmett. The Regional Parks Policy Plan is considered a chapter in the Regional Development Guide. There is a need to update both the existing Regional Parks Policy Plan content and connect it to the regional vision and shared goals of the Regional Development Guide. There is a new informally endorsed vision statement. It reads, "A prosperous, equitable, and resilient region with abundant opportunities for all to live, work, play, and thrive." The working regional goals are: our region is equitable and inclusive, our communities are healthy and safe, our region is dynamic and resilient, we lead on addressing climate change, and we protect and restore natural systems. The Parks Policy Plan, Parks Policy Area walks down the regional working goals, which is the high-level goals on the top there, with draft Parks Policy Area objectives, policies, and actions. These objectives are high-level policy area goals that were derived from council committees, park implementing agencies, and community engagement advice from over the last couple of years, as well as our collaboratively developed draft Regional Parks and Trails System vision, mission, and values. We integrated your comments and evolved the 4 objectives into 5 objectives. The main changes were to update the title of the infrastructure objective to take care of what we have, to more accurately reflect the topic. And secondly, we split the natural systems and climate resilience objective into 2, since this topic will need specific policies for each topic. The 5 draft objectives are: equity, better connect people with community, natural, and cultural resources in order to support physical, emotional, and mental well-being. Take care of what we have. Take care of existing regional parks and trails with regular and timely investment. Meet future needs. Acquire land and develop new opportunities to meet the region's growing demand for regional parks and trails. Adapt and mitigate. Adapt land management practices and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions to help ensure the region is resilient to climate impacts. Protect and restore. Protect and restore natural systems to ensure a high quality of life for everyone, including non-human species. We start to implement the objectives with policies and actions. The 5 existing policies include siting and acquisition, planning, system protection, recreation activities and facilities, and finance. We heard from you, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission, at your November and January meetings about priorities related to the objectives. We heard a need for flexible regional standards for community engagement, consistent wayfinding and signage across the system for visitor navigation, communication and marketing of our high-quality system, and lastly, to create a sustainable approach to fund the system. Can we achieve what's currently included in the system plan and by when? Emmett will now discuss the implementing agency's comments related to the draft objectives.
Thank you. So I just have 3 slides here that talk about what we learned from the regional park implementing agencies at a recent meeting with them to talk about those draft objectives. The next 3 slides, there's sort of 6 big areas and I'm just going to touch on a few pieces of advice that they shared during this conversation. So, as you know, you could have guessed there was a lot of discussion around equity. A few of the ideas that are emerged, and I'm just going to cover a couple of these here. Integrate and streamline the equity analysis requirement in long-range planning into the public and partner engagement requirement. So that's just really an improvement of process and of the how we do it. There was discussion about promoting co-management of parks and trails, establishment of cultural liaisons, such as tribal liaisons. That was something that agencies are both doing and wanting to do more of. Regarding our system plan, there were a couple of ideas. First, we have a classification scheme that, we have regional parks, regional trails, park reserves, and special recreation features. There was an idea to add 2 new classifications, one around cultural landscapes or protection of sacred spaces, and then a second one around natural system or open space classification idea. It wouldn't preclude recreation, but recreation would not be the emphasis. It would really be a conservation area, stitching together high-quality natural areas.
So like an extension beyond the reserve category we currently have?
Yeah. That would be, I was thinking a little bit like Anoka County and Dakota County have conservation protection areas. That's not what they call them. But that really are a little bit more protection oriented and not recreation focused. So a couple other emerging ideas are around natural systems and climate. Emerging mitigation ideas were around actually linking the creation of regional trails to lowering greenhouse gas emissions, recognizing our regional trail system as an arterial backbone of an active transportation network. To me, that really suggests better integration with our regional bicycle transportation network. Other ideas, promoting tree planting along trails for shade comfort, but also carbon sequestration. There were a number of adaptation ideas shared here, such as expanding our thinking around regional trail corridors as potential wildlife corridors, as I've already said. And then finally, natural system ideas. So there was a lot of discussion around protecting natural systems, emphasizing lands with restoration potential, thinking about locating units in low service, low wealth, high BIPOC areas. I was thinking about this during Todd's presentation in terms of where growth will occur, and converting the abandoned railroad corridors into regional trails. Like, that's not a new idea, but I think that the agencies were expressing some frustration working with railroads, not making progress, needing to think about new approaches to more effectively work on securing those particularly abandoned corridors. Finally, there was a lot of discussion around equitable recreation activities and facilities. We mentioned pickleball earlier, but expanding allowable activities to meet what we see as emerging needs. There were comments around balancing flexibility, like the move to new activities, to retaining what is unique about our system, that natural resource foundation. So now I'll pass it to Colin to talk a little bit about some of the climate and natural systems work that we've been doing.
Thanks, Emmett, and thanks for bearing with us, everybody. We recognize this is kind of a lot to take in. There's a lot of text on this slide here, but we've gathered a lot of really good feedback from implementing agencies and others, including you all in past meetings. So we just want to share a little bit about what we've heard, and particularly focus in a little bit today on this emerging area of climate and natural systems. So like some of our other work groups, we're focusing in on these particular topics with them, and we've held a couple of meetings with them. So we just want to tell you a little bit about what we've heard in those meetings. The first meeting, it was a little bit more broad, as you might imagine. We asked about desired outcomes and actions that implementing agencies could take both within their parks, within regional parks, regional trail spaces, special recreation features, park reserves, things that could be done there. We also talked a little bit about actions that could take place outside of parks, because this work cannot only occur within parks, although that is kind of the span of our authority or responsibility in the partnership. So some of those ideas included converting turf grass, expanding the bison herd, expanding recycling and organics collection, and some of the other ideas you see here. Our second meeting was intended to be a bit more specific, keying in on 3 areas of focus that you heard Tracey mention earlier, and Emmett continue with: adaptation, mitigation, and natural systems. And there were some good ideas that came out of that as well. We're starting to kind of key in on what might be policy statements or action statements. Promoting the regional parks and trail system as what we might call the Swiss Army knife of climate resilience. Building awareness of climate change as an issue, and parks as a critical part of the solution to that. You heard about this idea of building awareness in other contexts as well. It came up in this conversation as well. Acquiring land to protect land and water and protect ecosystem services. This is a key part of what our regional parks and trail system already does, but there's this desire to do more of it moving into the future and considering a growing population. Emmett already mentioned this potential for a new natural system or open space classification. This came up again in this separate discussion around this work group. And finally, the importance of data to collect and disseminate region-wide natural systems data or data and share tools to facilitate agency and community implementation. The example provided here is growing shade. You've probably heard a little bit about this one, which looks at tree canopy across the metropolitan area and where it might be lacking and where it's in good shape, but particularly looking at opportunities for expansion. Once again, we'll bring you back to the draft regional parks and trails objectives for a moment. You see those sort of across the middle of the slide here, just as a brief orientation as we move into the leading edge. Something new for you all to consider is coming up on the next slide. Emmett's going to take it from here and move us into some emerging areas of policy and actions.
So again, it's a busy slide. It says under construction, and we mean it. So what is all this, where does all this input lead us? Like that's kind of where we are left. And this is what I think of as the emerging plan. And I'd like to direct people's attention to the existing emerging parks policies, that middle row. I want to start by saying we've heard from you, we've heard from our park agency partners and council members saying we have a really strong and a robust existing plan, and so don't screw it up. I mean, they didn't say that, but they said, you know, we build on it, you know, use, so I like that a lot. For instance, the system plan, and there's that 3 there because it is chapter 3. Amanda, we gave you your new plan today. You can go home and read chapter 3. It's incredible. But chapter 3 is really about, it just describes what exists today. What are the existing parks and trails? What are the planned parks and trails? And then what are the search areas? So what's a little bit further out? I talked earlier about, you know, adding a couple new classifications to that. Interesting idea. I want to just express one thing I meant to say was a few key takeaways from this middle row is that the black text illustrates what exists today, so like the system plans there. The green text indicates new and emerging policy ideas coming out of this process. So I covered the system plan. The next 3 boxes, which we called 4A, 4B, and 4C, that was our siting and acquisition chapter. But we're thinking now of maybe dropping siting or locating parks and trails to more of a strategy and talking about it more globally as a sort of a natural systems chapter. We're thinking that this natural systems protection framework would contain siting and acquisition, but more as a strategy. And I also we want to better understand how our region is currently being served with an eye to identifying gaps in our existing system. The dashed box around those 3 just indicates that those 3 have a close relationship around natural systems, adaptation strategies, and mitigation strategies. We think this is a new and emerging clump of ideas that will take us in a good direction. We have our planning policies, system protection policies, and recreation activities and facilities. Those are chapters 5, 6, and 7. We think that they will move forward largely intact. Chapter 7, recreation activities and facilities, I've already indicated an expectation that, you know, the list that's in chapter 7 right now, I think it was put there in 1974 maybe, or maybe 80, but it was a while ago. We really see a need to evolve this list forward. So this is sort of what we see emerging in the plan. What we wanted to do now, and what I was saying is maybe we can just start this conversation, but with the idea that we'll return next month with a better evolved, even better evolved proposal for you to take a look at. But does this resonate? Are you concerned about something? I can go back to that slide 10, which is, I know, busy. Do you have any immediate advice that you'd like to share now?
Yes, Sue.
I have some immediate advice or a request.
Sure.
Water quality, water sustainability. A lot of our parks are located adjacent to or around rivers, lakes, creeks, streams, and both in terms of the maintenance of those parks, but also in terms of the water that's coming in as it is now. Water quality and water safety are really important. And PFAS, I recall when we were looking at the Battle Creek report here a few months ago, fishing, and I asked about PFAS in that particular area where the fishing occurs, and if I recall correctly, I think there has been some indication of PFAS there. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering what obligation we as the regional planners and the park agencies have in terms of warning people. You know, if you fish here, throw it back. For heaven's sakes, don't take it home and eat it. And then also back to what I had mentioned earlier about, you know, how we care for the parks. We had quite a robust discussion about that as it related to the golf course over at Hiawatha Nicollet. Am I saying that correctly?
Nokomis.
Nokomis.
Yeah. You got- I was
Yeesh,
trying
I'm
to-
losing it. Anyway, so I would like some sort of a reference to that because I think that's a current day issue that really needs to be hit on from every direction possible. And it's showing up all over the place.
And our current plan calls out for siting that we prioritize things adjacent to water.
Right.
So that also just falls under protecting the existence of where we want to have these parks. I'm not and so that possibly goes under a couple of different things. You've got your natural systems bit there, but it's also a system protection piece too.
Absolutely.
Because if we put something next to a lake because the lake was there and then we don't protect the quality of the lake, then our park suffers too.
Well, and depending on where the park is, even the water that visitors might be drinking from, the water fountain, if it's coming from a well that has PFAS in it, serious risk at there, so.
Well, we had that issue at Bunker Hills. They had no drinking water for like a year between when the well failed and when they could run a pipe to it.
Yeah.
Other thoughts?
I'll just say as a new person walking in, I just appreciate how this was all laid out, like, and easy to follow. Like, there is a lot of text, but it was really helpful for me, so when I was going through it last night, so thank you.
One thing that jumped out when there was a comment from the implementing agencies about wanting to prioritize putting things in like low-income areas and things like that. I was just thinking, okay, but how? Since a lot of that is in our most developed areas with not a lot of land available, and the land that is available is highly impacted. I mean, that's obviously the problem that we've been struggling with a lot of our equity stuff is the available land is all in the periphery and the populations we've been trying to think about are in the middle. How do you solve that problem? We all want to, but does anyone have any bright ideas that we haven't seen yet?
This isn't a bright idea, but I just thought I'd mention it. I think people are really looking at regional trails as an opportunity to deliver park-like amenities. Like the idea of when you said pickleball courts along a regional trail, like they're looking for picnic areas, definitely improved amenities like water and bathroom along trails. Like all of our early, not all, but a lot of our early regional trails, like we didn't really think about that as well as we perhaps should have. And I think that's, so I don't know, but trail corridors are still hard to get, but they're easier than large parking.
Yeah. Well, and also besides the like facilities within them, also just how we designed the corridors. Forget what we named it, but I'm thinking of the one along the Mississippi up by like Dayton and such, where they're choosing to go with the whole thing along the bluff.
Rush Creek?
Maybe,
Sorry.
I don't know, of a few, like a couple 100 feet wide.
Yeah.
So that it would include, the whole riverfront rather than just enough to put pavement through.
Mm-hmm.
That provides a, natural resource experience in a way that other places don't necessarily. It's not just a place to ride your bike through, but while you're there, you kind of feel like you're in a park, even if you're not actually that far from, a residential area or commercial area. That strip is protected wide enough to give that kind of experience. Anthony, did you have something?
Well, one, I think I was gonna say that on the, there is something happening right now, like, for example, Midtown Greenway, there's a conversation how we are going, do we establish that as a regional park? I'm using park versus regional trail because there's an opportunity to do some development along that actually, where you're spending more time there, you know, at different areas of it rather than using it as a, you know, thoroughfare. And I was gonna say, I think, Emmett, one of the things that came up that I feel like the implementing agencies talked about was this idea of rails to trails and how we're gonna use that system relative to part of the active transportation system. And you know, a recommendation or a thought would be, one, the conference that Amanda and I went to.
Yeah.
In terms of the way that the trail, the way the rail, or it used to be rail, you know, not just rails, but the way the cities are connected, and there's a very different way that they're developing trail. Large, long, you know, systems than we are, and because, you know, the East Coast is developed so differently around that kind of commuter rail and the way the cities are, we have to do something differently here to really fully maximize. And so I don't know if that we need to form a working group and actually think about that. But Rails to Trails Conservancy is another group that's working on that, that has a different, and then the other one is Impact, which used to be something, I don't know what they used to be, but now they're called Impact, which is another group, you know, went to their event this year. And so just the way that we think about and we have two things that are happening with Rails to Trails. One is the 26th Street bikeway investigation, they're looking at a commuter bridge there, and the other one is just the commuter, the Rails to Trails connecting the Midtown Greenway into St. Paul. So I think that bridge, you know what I'm talking about, the bridge. So I think there's something specifically there that we could kind of do something interesting relative to how we actually investigate the future of our regional trails that we are going to turn into this backbone of an active transportation system that we somehow maximize what's happening around. Like there's something there that we could do more connected and possibly serve this role of how we're serving central communities, because the rails go through all those communities too. I mean, there's something, there may be something there, because you're right, that may be the new land, except for the couple of land bridges that people want to build, you know. But you know, the idea of, you're right, there's no new land, right? And you know, in the city propers, and so there will be something, we have to do something innovative there to serve not just sport courts. I think that's the other thing. I think we, you know, even North Commons, and I don't know if you all saw that, that's a big park, it's not a regional park, but a major $30 million investment in a city park. And we're doing domes, more ball fields, you know, stuff like that. And so I don't know if there's a way that we look at something that we can do to influence those investments. And there's gonna be a lot of that investment in the central city. Like, I feel like that's something that's coming. And it'll be heavily invested in through, especially Ramsey County, St. Paul, and Minneapolis.
I'm curious on the rail thing. You mentioned that implementing agencies frustrations with working with the railroads and getting those things done. I'm wondering what they're thinking we might be able to do to help that. Is there some sort of policy change that makes that easier? Or is it council staff helping coordinate things? Or what is that they're asking for? And the other thing that jumped out when you were talking about maybe some of the rail to trail stuff would be the answer. The other thing that worries me about some of that is I know out by me, there's been several things that's been on the books for decades of, oh, well, when this railroad is vacated, we're gonna turn it into a trail or a bus line. There's been a couple of those, and they're still in use as railroads. So people are saying, well, 40 years ago, we were pretty sure they were gonna vacate this, and they never did. So now they're having to figure out a different plan. So we also have to make sure that we don't say, oh yeah, our plan for these underserved communities is as soon as that railroad gets out, you'll get a trail. If that then never happens.
Chair, I think it's along the lines of what Anthony talked about. They're frustrated. They see these corridors that just sit there year after year. They don't have new strategies for working with the railroad or getting the railroad to be responsive. And so I think there was some interest in because they think that some of this lobbying probably needs to take at a federal level. And that is, a slow and complicated
So maybe it's
conversation.
like us working as a go-between to lean on our federal congressional representatives, kind of a thing?
I think that could be one thing. There's those national organizations that you mentioned, Anthony, that have experience working with railroads.
Yeah.
And
And they're doing a lot of, like I said, I was really impressed with, again, the amount of direct contact they're having with the railroads. It is happening, and the funding is coming federally. So that's the other thing, is because of the way they're working, the funding is coming through the federal government, and those are big dollars. Like that's a whole nother thing in terms of the scale of dollars that we're looking at. And if we do something that elevates this to a transportation level conversation, the dollars also get really big. I mean, you know what I mean? Where you really, I don't know, it's just the scale of transportation oriented development, is $1 billion. Like they say $1 billion, like really casually. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Pocket change.
Well,
Yeah.
and a
No.
lot of that probably
Clean
comes
out the
through with
cushions.
the RBTN rather than us.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
How often do counties and cities and townships meet to talk about the coordination of park resources? Does that vary by county? Is it ever done regionally?
I mean, they meet with, the implementing agencies at least meet with council staff, every
Every
Well,
month.
every
Right,
month.
but I'm referring to
But, like,
connecting them with the
municipalities.
communities, and I've brought this up a few times, we talk about the regional parks, but we've gotta remember that we've got city
Yeah.
parks and, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
We've got city parks, we've got school parks, we even have churches with parks.
Probably only when they have a particular project in mind.
Well, like this summer, we're actually working with the city of Minneapolis to do a really particular project around that we're calling a park connector program. Like how are we actively connecting inside of the city, park to park to park? Like, how do we do that? And Emmett and I threaten to Emmett every year that I wanna do, the regional tri-county
Yeah,
bike tour
right.
thing, but I do think there's something, especially thinking about some of the cities, like what they've done out in Chaska, for example. Like, it's worth a bike ride, what's happening down in Red Wing. I mean, or Hastings, if you, like the trail from St. Paul to Hastings, and once you get to Hastings, it's spectacular, right? You know what I mean? And then, so I think there could be some, just kind of to your point, more joint promotion, shared something that actually does connect us, because there's so many people that just get close and then they stop at the Buffaloes down. You know what I mean? They're going south in St. Paul, they get and they stop.
Yeah.
And they literally take the same trail back, and rather than go all the way to Hastings, right? Or cross over and get on the other side of 61 and use some of that trail system. So there's something we could do to promote more of that. And then the economic benefit, that's the other thing they do in the East Coast, they really invest money in shared things so that they realize the economic benefit of 50 people biking to Hastings on a Saturday morning. And what does that mean to Hastings, right? Or the other direction, whatever, but the economic benefit of, and it seems like, but 50 people showing up in downtown Hastings, is that on a Saturday morning is a real,
Big deal.
yeah, it's a big deal, right?
Well, and you raised that point when we were looking at the Washington County proposal,
Right, when we're talking about possible
Yep.
business involvement
Yep.
along the state right.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd say that even happens in, northern Minnesota, talk about the big regional trails up there, like obviously they have more land that can be developed, but they've certainly built a tourism and, just a visitor model with businesses that are situated at various places along those trails, so absolutely.
Anything else to comment on at this point?
You know, it would be, is there, and I don't feel like we got this in our notes, did we?
No,
This
we did not.
particular- Yeah, I think that it would be, you know, it'd be good if we could actually have that to look at, because I think there is a lot of fine print in there, I think there, I mean, and it requires some digesting.
Yeah.
And I think that if we could get a copy of this between now and the next time we get together, and I think,
The presentations,
Yeah.
excuse me,
Yeah,
I can
the
get
slides.
those to you.
yeah, just the,
Thanks.
yeah.
Yes,
Tam.
and actually, I thought about that this morning, like business items and,
Yeah, this, and this is the, and this is refined, I mean, but this is like I feel like the third time we've seen some
Yeah.
version of this actually, but we haven't really digested it any of those times, you know, so I think it would be, and, I just, there's stuff there that we need to.
Well, and
to
it's
give you
tricky
good
to like,
feedback.
we've seen parts of it and then we're adding parts of it, so it's
Right.
like maybe we've digested what's along the top, but not some of these new
Yeah.
green boxes, right?
And the new sustainability stuff, I think even whether it's water or whether it's how we're talking about climate action, climate solutions, I mean, and how that seems to be elevating too, that's something, and again, I don't know if I'm just imagining it, but I feel like that is being elevated this time around, is that in the parks plan, like, so, you know, I feel like that's important, like, I think that's an important note, that the park system wants to take an active role, active stance around education and, you know, planning and development towards the issues related to climate action. Yeah, and we really shouldn't miss that. I think it's something that now that I'm seeing, I see that. I feel like they're making a statement to do that, a point to do that.
Are there any other areas that you were hoping to get feedback on today?
This was great, and I'll just tell you that we will be back with a very similar framework. We'll share it earlier, and because I agree that this really takes time to digest, and because this is, you know, it's not a revolution, it is an evolution, but it's an important evolution, because like I look at right now, the policy plan, and I agree, it has a real emphasis on water and protecting and locating near water bodies. But we need to elevate how natural systems and climate action shows up, and we need to get better at it, because water is the 21st century issue. I mean, we need to continue to emphasize that. So.
Anything else commissioners wanted to add? All right, we'll see you again next month. Thank you.
the gavel.
Oh, not yet. We still have reports. All right, that brings us to the reports section. The one thing I'll comment on is that the Equity Grant Program Review Committee is about to start meeting, looking at the applications there. The good news is that our applications are very close to the amount of money that we actually have. So most of those will be able to get awarded. So look for a funding recommendation on that in a couple of months. I think that's all I have. Are there any other commissioner reports at this time? Liaison, staff.
I just have two quick ones, and one involves Councilmember Vento, is that we're going to get our District D filled. I will get those interviews scheduled. We have 2 candidates, and so stay tuned. We will hopefully bring in a final member to help. And then the legislative session begins on February 12th, which is a big deal. I know Amanda is tracking it. The governor released his bonding bill. He included the regional park system in it, which was great, for $2.5 million, which, you know, it's a start. So the council would match that with about $1.67 million for a total of about $4 million. So what that means for our park agencies is a lot of partially funded projects. But stay tuned. This is just a starting point, and we will keep you posted. But that we'll come back with regular updates. Even by March, we'll know more than we know right now, so that's
Okay.
all I have.
Sounds
Thank you.
good. All right, then we can adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.